What if I told you that the real bomb of the Australian Grand Prix qualifying was not the pole, nor the performance of McLaren or Red Bull, but something that Lewis Hamilton discovered inside the Ferrari? Because while many thought that the Briton was still far from understanding the SF-26, the data revealed something completely unexpected. Hamilton found key information about the car that not even Ferrari was clear about, and that even left Charles Leclerc looking in surprise at what was happening on the other side of the garage. What happened in that qualifying session at Albert Park could change the way Ferrari understands its car this season, and could also alter the internal balance between its two drivers. Because when a 7-time world champion starts to decipher the DNA of a new car, the consequences can be enormous for the entire championship. But for Ferrari, this weekend had an additional ingredient that made it even more important. It wasn't just about checking if the car was competitive, but about understanding how it actually behaved with Lewis Hamilton at the wheel. The Briton had arrived at the team with the mission of returning the Italian team to the fight for titles, but also with an enormous personal challenge: adapting to a car completely different from anything he had driven for more than a decade at Mercedes. And Melbourne represented the first scenario where that adaptation was going to be tested under the real pressure of a Formula One classification. From the beginning of the weekend, it was clear that the SF-26 had a particular behavior. During free practice, the car showed moments of competitiveness, but also left doubts in certain phases of the lap. It didn't seem like the fastest car on the grid in absolute terms, but the engineers were beginning to notice something interesting in the data. When the car's balance was correct, the Ferrari could be extremely efficient under braking and in medium-speed corners, two key areas of the Albert Park layout. That detail was not yet evident to everyone, but Hamilton was beginning to perceive it from the cockpit. Meanwhile, on the other side of the garage, Charles Leclerc continued to be the team's natural reference in qualifying. The Monegasque had been dominating one-lap performance within Ferrari for years, and his ability to extract the maximum from the car in Q3 was well known. However, as the sessions progressed, the engineers began to notice something curious in the comparative data between both drivers. Hamilton, despite still being in the process of adaptation, was beginning to find areas of the circuit where he could equal or even improve some microsectors with respect to his teammate. This didn't mean he was completely at the same level yet, but it did indicate that the Brit was beginning to understand how he should drive the SF-26 to realize its potential. One of the most striking aspects for the engineers was the speed with which Hamilton interpreted the car's reactions to minor changes in the configuration. Small adjustments in the aerodynamic balance or in the braking distribution produced very clear responses in the behavior of the car. That sensitivity of the SF-26 to setup changes was something that Ferrari had been looking for some time, as it allowed performance to be tuned more precisely during the weekend. And Hamilton, thanks to his experience accumulated during years of development at Mercedes, seemed to have a special ability to identify exactly what adjustments the car needed to improve. As the qualifying session approached, the atmosphere inside the Ferrari garage began to change. What initially seemed like a difficult weekend was beginning to turn into an opportunity to better understand the car. Hamilton spoke to the engineers more and more specifically about the sensations he received at corner entry, stability under braking and traction when exiting slow corners. Each comment helped fine-tune the SF-26 setup, and little by little the car began to show more predictable behavior. That predictability was key so that a driver could attack the limit on a qualifying lap without feeling that the car could betray him at any moment. And it was precisely at that moment when Saturday's big surprise in Melbourne began to take shape. Because while the rest of the teams were solely focused on finding a few extra tenths for qualifying, Hamilton was discovering something deeper, a different way of understanding how the SF-26 should be piloted to unlock its true potential. A discovery that would not only affect his own adaptation to the car, but could also change the way in which Ferrari would develop the car throughout the season. That finding was not yet evident to the public, or even to many within the paddock. But inside the red garage they were beginning to realize that something important was happening. Because when a driver with the experience of Lewis Hamilton begins to decipher the language of a new car, the data that appears in the telemetry can reveal much more than a simple improvement in lap time. And what Ferrari was seeing at that moment in Melbourne was precisely the beginning of something that could redefine the internal balance of the team. The real revelation began when Ferrari calmly analyzed the full qualifying data at Albert Park. During the hot laps, engineers spotted something they didn't expect to see so early in the season. Lewis Hamilton had found a different way to extract performance from the SF-26. It was not just a competitive time or a good isolated lap, but a completely different reading of the car's behavior at several key points on the circuit. What Hamilton was doing with the Ferrari was beginning to reveal aspects of the car that not even the team itself was completely clear about until that moment. The first data that caught our attention appeared in the deep braking phases. Albert Park has several areas where drivers must brake very late before turning the car towards the apex, and it was precisely there where Hamilton began to make a difference in the telemetry. The sensors showed that the Briton was using the potential of the SF-26 front axle in a much more aggressive way than Ferrari had seen in testing. The car responded with a very rapid rotation at the beginning of the corner, allowing Hamilton to place the car on the ideal line sooner. This behavior confirmed something that the team had suspected since the development of the car. The new aerodynamic concept of the SF-26 was designed to offer an extremely reactive front axle. But the discovery did not end there. When engineers compared Hamilton's laps to Charles Leclerc's, a very interesting pattern emerged. While the Monégasque maintained a more traditional style, Hamilton was modifying his technique to adapt to the character of the car. Instead of maintaining acceleration longer before braking, the Briton lifted his foot earlier and entered the braking phase with greater anticipation, which allowed him to maintain a higher minimum speed in the center of the curve. That technique, very similar to what Leclerc has used for years at Ferrari, allowed Hamilton to get very close to the pace of his teammate in qualifying. Another key point emerged when Ferrari reviewed the car's sensitivity to configuration changes. During the weekend, the team made small adjustments to the aerodynamic balance and braking distribution. What Hamilton discovered was that the SF-26 responded extremely clearly to these modifications. Minimal changes in the setup produced immediate improvements in the car's stability, something that had not always happened with Ferraris from previous years. That direct response allowed the setup to be fine-tuned just before qualifying, creating a much more predictable base car to attack a fast lap. For a driver like Hamilton, that predictability is essential. When a car responds consistently, the driver can approach the limit with much more confidence. And that's exactly what happened in Australia's qualifying. Although the SF-26 did not seem to be the fastest car in all sectors of the circuit, Hamilton explained that the car's platform allowed him to attack without feeling that the result depended on luck or an unpredictable reaction of the car. That feeling of control was one of the keys that allowed him to find such valuable data for Ferrari. That question began to take shape just when the championship was just beginning. Because what Ferrari had discovered in qualifying for the Australian Grand Prix was not simply a one-time improvement in the car's performance. It was the sign that the SF-26 technical project, together with the experience of Lewis Hamilton, could become a much more dangerous combination than many expected at the beginning of the season. The consequences of what happened in qualifying for the Australian Grand Prix began to be felt even before the weekend ended. Within Ferrari, engineers knew that the data obtained with Lewis Hamilton was not simply a one-time improvement in performance, but an important clue as to how the SF-26 should evolve over the rest of the season. When a driver manages to figure out the behavior of a new car so early in the championship, the way the team works around that car changes completely. And that is exactly what began to happen in the Red Garage after what happened in Melbourne. But this discovery had an even greater implication for the championship. If Hamilton managed to understand the car this quickly, his influence on the development of the SF-26 during the following races could be decisive. In Formula One, the first Grand Prix of the season usually set the technical direction for the entire year. The teams analyze the data obtained on the track and decide which areas should be improved in the following evolutions of the car. And what Ferrari had discovered in Melbourne could become the basis on which to build the next updates to the car. Furthermore, the season schedule made it very clear that this was just the beginning. After Australia, the championship continued rapidly with very different circuits, starting with China and then Japan, tracks that require completely different technical characteristics than Albert Park. That meant Ferrari would have multiple opportunities to test whether the conclusions Hamilton had found in Melbourne held true at other tracks on the calendar as well. And this is where the real twist in the story appears. Because if the SF-26 really did respond better when driven in the way Hamilton had discovered, Ferrari could find itself with a very interesting situation within its own team. On the one hand, Charles Leclerc would still be one of the fastest drivers on the grid at one lap. But on the other hand, Hamilton could begin to influence more and more the way the car develops throughout the championship. That opens a question that many within the paddock were already beginning to ask themselves after the Australian Grand Prix. If Hamilton continues to decipher the Ferrari's DNA at this speed, could he end up becoming the team's technical reference sooner than anyone imagined? Because what happened in Melbourne qualifying was not just a specific moment of adaptation of a driver to a new car. It was the first sign that the combination between Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari could become something much more dangerous for the rest of the grid than many expected at the start of the season. And if that process continues in the following races, the true impact of that discovery in Australia could be felt throughout the championship. The Australian Grand Prix classification left much more than a simple snapshot of Ferrari's performance at the start of the season. What it really revealed was Lewis Hamilton's first big step in his adaptation process to the SF-26. In a matter of one weekend, the Briton went from trying to understand the car's behavior to discovering data that even the team itself was still trying to decipher. That progress not only reduced the gap with Charles Leclerc, but also opened a new way of interpreting the car's potential. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.